Thank you. So, good morning, everybody. Move on. So, I'm going to start by showing you that every system is different. As we can see from this slide, you get differences in calf type, differences in our target growth rate, which will be linked to the mature body weight of cows on your herd, differences in environmental temperature, differences in health status, and differences in feeding systems. So this is whether you have a computerized feeder and feeding little and often throughout the day, or on a twice daily restricted system. So the most effective milk replacer program is one that matches the calf requirements with your farm objectives. So the feed plans that we use must reflect these differences so that we get to the same endpoint, which is setting the heifer up for a long and productive life. So this morning, I am going to look at different types of milk replacers, and then I'm going to use a couple of case studies to look at milk allowance and the different factors that we need to consider when thinking about how much to feed these young calves. So starting with milk replacer ingredients first. So dairy ingredients are the main source of protein in a milk replacer, and these include both skim and whey. Skim milk is whole milk with the fat removed, so skim milk is still 80% casein protein, 20% whey protein, and if you dry that, that gives you your dry skim milk powder. Whey is the co-product of cheese manufacturing, so it's defined as the liquid fraction remaining after the precipitation of the casein. This liquid whey can be dried in processed in a number of different ways, giving rise to different types of whey ingredients. And these include whey powder, delactose whey, and concentrated whey protein. I am next going to share with you a trial that we have done actually comparing milk replacers based on skim milk and one based on concentrated whey protein. Now, the main difference between these two ingredients when you feed them to a calf is that a milk replacer containing skim will form a clot in the abomasum due to the presence of that casein protein. Whereas if you feed a milk replacer based only on whey, so it's got no skim present, you'll get no clot forming due to the absence of casein. So for this trial, we had two milk replacers. The purple one was based on concentrated whey protein, and the orange one was based on skim. So 66% of the ingredient was skim milk powder. These two milk replacers were fed to calves at up to 7 litres per day, so they were getting 1,050 grams of milk solids. As you can see on this graph, which is the body weight throughout the milk feeding period, there was no difference in the body weight of the calves across the two treatments on day 56 at weaning. So they both came in at around 73 kilos. We then followed the heifers on the trial through to third calving, and we found that there was no difference in their total milk production over the first two lactations, and there was no difference in their milk per day of life through to third calving, where they both came in at around 12 kilos per day. So this shows that overall performance is good for calves that are fed either a milk replacer with good quality skim or good quality whey protein. There is currently a growing demand for dairy protein for use in human food application, and this is in part driven by a big uptake of weight loss drugs. So due to this, the cost of dairy protein is high, and the availability of dairy protein is going to get increasingly difficult. For these reasons, most milk replacers do already contain some vegetable protein, and they're going to need to keep containing some vegetable protein going forwards as an alternative source to dairy protein. So this is a trial that we did where we compared a milk replacer based on all dairy protein. So in the purple box there, it was based on concentrated whey protein. And then we compared it to a milk replacer based on dairy plus vegetable protein, so in the orange box. So you can see there it was based on concentrated whey protein, and the source of vegetable protein was hydrolyzed wheat gluten. These milk replacers, again, were fed to calves at up to 7 litres per day, so they were getting up to 1,050 grams of milk solids. And first of all, if you look at the table on this slide, you can see the digestibility. So we tested the digestibility of the milk replacers when the calves were 2 to 3 weeks of age and 6 to 7 weeks of age. You can see that the all-dairy protein milk replacer, the digestibility at 2 to 3 weeks came in at just under 93%, and then the one with dairy plus veg came in at just under 91%. So this is to be expected, that the all-dairy protein milk replacer will still be a little bit more digestible than one with vegetable protein. But this data shows that actually using good quality vegetable protein alongside good quality dairy protein, you still get a very good value for digestibility, and it's only dropped off by about 2%. Importantly, when we looked at the body weight of calves throughout the milk feeding period, which is shown on this graph, there was actually very little difference between the two groups. And you can see that on day 56 at weaning, they both came in at around 78 kilos. We then followed the heifers on this trial through to third calving again, and we found that there was no difference in their total milk production over the first 2 lactations. And we also found there was no difference in their milk per day of life through to third calving, with them both coming in at just under 13 kilos per cow per day. So again, this just shows that we can successfully use good quality vegetable protein alongside good quality dairy protein and still get very good performance results. So now I'm going to move on to feeding the calf. We know that supplying the young calf with more milk will maximise its early feed efficiency and its early growth potential. It'll improve its health because mounting an immune response is a considerable energetic demand. It's been shown to enhance organ growth and development, which is then linked to their future milk production. And this is, for all of these reasons, this is why we have actually increased how much we feed calves over the last sort of 10 to 15 years. And there's been a big increase from how we used to feed calves. But this must be balanced with solid feed intake. And again, we know that those calves that are drinking a good amount of milk and also eating a good amount of solid feed will obviously have an improved nutrient supply, so we'll have better growth before weaning. But really, critically, the role of that solid feed is to drive rumen development. And we need these calves to have well-developed rumens at the point of weaning to facilitate that weaning process and ensure that we get no setbacks in growth around weaning. So both milk and solid feed are important, but it remains to be determined if there's actually a sweet spot in terms of milk volume and starter intake. So now I'm going to share with you a couple of case studies where we've actually looked at feeding different milk allowances and looking at the impact on calf performance. So for this first case study, this was based on a unit with an exceptionally high level of attention to detail. The incidence of respiratory disease and scour has been historically low on this site, and this unit has a target growth rate of 0.8 kilos per day. So for these reasons, the milk replacer that was chosen for this unit was a 23% crude protein, 19% fat product. It had 30% skim, and it also contained milk oligosaccharides, which are your natural milk sugars that are there to enhance the growth of the beneficial bacteria and support gut development. So for this trial, we had a total of 96 Holstein female calves, and half of them were fed 6 litres over 63 days, and the other half were fed 8 litres over 77 days. So the ones being fed 6 litres were getting a total of 900 grams of milk solids per day. So that was a total of 45 kilos of milk powder over the 63 days. The ones getting 8 litres were getting 1,200 grams of milk solids a day. So that was a total of 71 kilos of milk powder over the 77 days. As you can see on the graph, the ones fed 6 litres were weaned over 21 days, so they were all weaned on day 63, and the ones being fed 8 litres were weaned over 28 days, so weaned on day 77. In terms of other calf management, the calves were all pair-housed and fed via teated buckets. The calves had deep straw bedding, and you can see in the photo in the middle that the open side of the barn had a gale breaker mesh just to help provide some protection and warmth to those calves. And when temperatures did drop low, the calves were fitted with a calf jacket over the first few weeks of life. All calves had access to water and calf starter pellets, and as you can see in the photo behind me, for the young calves, the starter was initially provided in shallow dog bowls just to try and encourage intakes for them. And then they also had straw in racks. So first of all, this is looking at the impact of the milk allowance on milk refusals. So for the calves being fed 6 litres, the milk refusals were recorded between days 5 and 15. So across all the 48 calves that were being fed 6 litres, there were a total of 2 instances in the morning and 18 in the afternoon throughout that milk feeding period when calves did not consume all of the milk feed. And in total, this represented 35 litres over those 48 calves. For the calves being fed 8 litres, refusals occurred up to day 28, and across all the 48 calves, there were 10 refusals in the morning, and this actually increased to 38 in the afternoon when calves failed to drink that full 4-litre feed. So this just suggests that if you are feeding twice a day, it can be more of a challenge to get 4 litres into them, especially in the afternoon when the calves on this trial at this site appeared not to be quite so hungry and not wanting to drink that full 4-litre feed. So next, this is looking at the impact of milk allowance on starter intake. So on this graph here, we've got starter intake up the side in grams per calf per day. So the purple line is for the calves being fed 6 litres per day, and these calves were eating more starter and from an earlier age, which is not surprising because they were being fed less milk. So in total, the calves being fed 6 litres per day consumed 108 kilos of starter over the first 90 days. If we compare this to the ones being fed 8 litres, which is the orange line, you can see that they took longer, they increased their starter intake more slowly because they were being fed more milk, so they wouldn't have been driven by hunger to go and eat starter. And then in total, they consumed 79 kilos of starter, so that was 30 kilos less than the ones being fed 6 litres. The graph on the right is then looking at daily live weight gain. And so starting with the ones fed 8 litres, so the orange line, you can see that initially they did have an advantage in daily live weight gain because obviously we're feeding them more milk, so they're getting more energy, and especially in the first few weeks of life when starter intake is minimal. But what we found was that when those calves started that weaning transition, so on around day 49, where the R is, that's when milk was first reduced, you can see they take a hit in terms of their growth. So growth rate goes from 0.95 dropping to 0.81 when we start to wean them before it then recovers. And that just is a reflection of the fact that those calves were eating less starter. If we look at the purple line, which was the calves fed 6 litres, you can see that when they had their milk reduced on day 42, there was actually no drop in growth. Those calves continued to grow, again reflecting the fact that those calves had previously been eating more starter, so were able to compensate better when we reduced their milk. The biggest impact of milk allowance was between sort of week 6 and week 9, when we found that there is actually the ones being fed 8 litres had around a 4 to 5 kilo body weight advantage. But then due to that drop in growth around weaning for those ones being fed 8 litres, the difference at week 13 was only around 3 kilos. In terms of calf health, it was good across both treatments and for all 96 calves on the trial. So for only 1 calf in the 6 litres and 4 calves in the 8 litres showed early signs of scours. And again, because this was a unit where the attention to detail was exceptional, they were very much any early signs, these calves were treated. So you can see there that actually of the 5 calves that were treated for early signs of scours, 3 of them actually only received oral rehydration fluids. And then in terms of respiratory disease, 3 calves in the 6 litres and just 1 in the 8 litres showed early symptoms of respiratory illness. So there wasn't really much of a difference between the 2 treatments. So in summary for this unit, they had excellent level of attention to detail and good health. The calves being fed 6 litres over 63 days, that total of 45 kilos of milk powder, had less milk refusals. They were eating more starter, so they appeared to be better equipped to cope with that weaning transition. And they achieved a daily live weight gain through to 13 weeks of 0.89 kilos per day. The calves that were fed 8 litres over 77 days, so a total of 71 kilos of milk powder, they had more milk refusals. They did have better growth before that weaning transition begun due to the fact they were being fed more milk solids, but they were then eating less starter, so their growth rate did suffer throughout that weaning transition. And overall, they achieved a growth rate of 0.93 through to 13 weeks, resulting in a 3 kilo body weight advantage. So this second case study is a very different type of system, so can't be compared to the one we've just sort of looked at. So this unit is based in the southwest of England, and they're block calving from September through to October. The graph here is from the Met Office showing historical temperatures in the region, and these are actually maximum temperatures recorded. So you can see that when the calves are hitting the ground in September, October onwards, anything in or below the red box here is cold for that young calf, so they're going to be starting to use more of their energy to keep warm. In addition, if we look at the photo, you can see this is quite a cold shed. There's a big sort of open end to it, so the wind does whip through, and we've got those big exposed concrete walls, making it a bit colder for those calves as well. So environmental temperature is a challenge on this unit. In addition, because of the block calving nature, crypto can also be a challenge towards the end of that block calving. So for this reason, the milk replacer that was chosen for this site was a 23% protein, 21% fat product. So it's slightly higher in fat just to get a little bit more energy into them, but not too high fat that we're going to suppress starter intake. It was an all-dairy protein milk replacer based on concentrated whey protein. And the reason for this is that whey protein contains many naturally occurring bioactive components that are known to support calf health. So by being all dairy protein, you're maximising the amount of those naturally occurring bioactive components. And it also contained a yeast which feeds the beneficial bacteria and helps bind any pathogens, stopping them attaching to the gut wall. So for this site, again, half the calves were fed 7 litres over 63 days, and the other half were fed 9 litres over 77 days. So for the ones being fed 7 litres, they were getting 1,050 grams of milk solids a day. They were weaned over 21 days, and they had getting a total of 57 kilos of milk powder. For the ones fed 9 litres, they were getting a total of 1,350 grams of solids a day. They were weaned over 28 days, and they received a total of 84 kilos of milk powder. In terms of management, these calves were group housed and fed via a computerised feeder. Straw bales were put across the middle of the pen just to provide a little bit more shelter and warmth for these calves. And again, these calves had access to water. Calf starter pellets, which you can see were put up at the front, positioned between the feed stations. So again, if a calf is waiting to feed, it just encourages intake, and they also had straw in racks. So looking at the day live weight gain first, again, the ones being fed 9 litres had a higher day live weight gain, reflecting the fact that they were being fed more milk, getting more energy when starter intake's minimal early on. But again, when we came to reduce the milk and we'd start to wean these calves, you can see that on this site, they actually took quite a big hit in their growth. So they went from growing at 0.93 down to 0.7 when weaning started. Again, probably just reflecting that on this site, these calves were probably eating very little starter, so were unable to compensate for that drop in milk. Looking at the purple line, which were the ones fed 7 litres, when the milk was reduced, they continued to grow. There was no drop in growth. They had a small little dip on the, at the point of actual weaning, but soon recovered. So overall, due to the sort of big drop in growth for those fed 9 litres, the day live weight gain from birth through to 12 weeks across both treatments actually came out exactly the same at 0.78 kilos per day. Again, in terms of body weight, the biggest advantage appeared to be between weeks 6 and 10, when there was about a 2 to 3 kilo body weight advantage for those calves being fed 9 litres. But because of that setback in growth around weaning, at week 12, they both came in at 104 kilos. In terms of health, calf health was actually good, despite their history of crypto. So you can see that just one calf in each treatment was treated for scours. So this just shows that if you put in the right milk replacer, and actually for this particular system, feeding either 7 litres or 9 litres supported the calf enough despite the challenges known on this site. So in summary, for this site, we know that the calves are challenged with environmental temperature and health. Calves fed 7 litres over 63 days, so a total of 57 kilos of milk powder, appeared to be better equipped to cope with that weaning transition, and they achieved a growth rate of 0.78 kilos through to 12 weeks. The calves fed 9 litres over 77 days, so a total of 84 kilos of milk powder. They had better growth rates before that weaning transition started, but then growth did suffer. So overall, they also had a growth rate of 0.78 kilos per day through to 12 weeks. So starter intake alongside a good milk allowance is absolutely key to that weaning transition. So just some of the things we can do to encourage starter intake: use a milk replacer with a fat level of 16 to 21%, because there is data showing that if we push much beyond 21%, that can actually suppress starter intake. Offering around 1,000 grams of milk solids seems optimal, but obviously milk allowance will depend on your farm targets and your challenges. But obviously the higher we push those milk solids, that will suppress starter intake. Reduce milk over at least a 3-week period prior to weaning is important, and as a guide, allow for every 2 litres, allow approximately a week. So if you're feeding 6 or 7 litres, allow 3 weeks. If you're going up to 8 or 9 litres, allow 4 weeks. Offering chopped forage drives starter intake, and always make sure you provide fresh starter and water, and think about where your starter's positioned. Make it accessible for those calves. So in summary, I want to go back to where we started, showing that every system is different, and your milk feeding plan in terms of what you feed and how much to feed needs to be right for your individual system. So consider your challenges and your objectives. So if you're feeding more milk to supply the calf with more energy, which can help combat environmental and health challenges, be aware that this can suppress starter intake, so weaning needs to be managed really carefully. It remains to be determined exactly where that sweet spot lies between milk allowance and starter intake, and this will differ according to the system. But as we've seen, feeding around 1,000 grams of milk solids can deliver very good calf results. Thank you very much.